continue on in chapter 9, looking at um, some different psychological philosophies that are theories that are often used in education and a lot of times guide what teachers do as far as their philosophy of education. And so the first one is what we call behaviorism. And this is where people learn from consequences of their actions and those of others. So a lot of people in education have the thought that you can basically train students to learn. If they see a student or they do something that gets a negative response, then they learn from that and they don't do that again. And this could be used for learning in the classroom. Their behavior in this theory is rewarded. If it's rewarded, it's more likely to be repeated. That's sort of the thought. So I think about this like if you were going to train a dog, for example, if you want a dog to sit, then you teach it that when you say sit, it sits. And oftentimes, as you're training it, you'll reward it. You know, pat it on the head, good boy, good job. Maybe you give it a treat. And the idea behind behaviorism is that you can do the same thing with students. And so you can teach them based off getting them to repeat behavior when they get rewarded. And behavior that is punished or not rewarded is less likely to be repeated. So the opposite, meaning that if a student does something that they shouldn't do, well, you don't reward that. You reward what they do that is good, and so that reinforces the idea of continue to do this. And so in behaviorism, curriculum is based on clearly defined behaviors which students are rewarded for achieving. It is my opinion behaviorism is great for teaching behavior. So in the elementary schools, elementary classroom, if you're wanting to teach students that, how you want them to behave in your classroom, then behaviorism has a place. If you want to teach students that when they go to lunch, they have to get in a single file line, and you reward them and praise them when they do that, well, then they're more likely going to try to do that again because they like getting that praise and they like getting recognized for doing something well. I mentioned in one of the previous videos that we did, I believe it was in chapter 4, PBIS points. My kids' school gives PBIS points. When a student is seen doing something well or something good, they'll get points for that, and they can take those points and then use those in the PBIS store. And so kids are being, the good behavior is being reinforced. If somebody spills something and a student helps them pick it up, well, they may get PBIS points because it's positive behavior intervention, right? Trying to make them do the same behavior again. Behaviorism, in my opinion, is really great for teaching behaviors. It is not great in teaching content. Okay, so there's a big difference in teaching behavior. Behaviorism, obviously, the name kind of favors that. And when you teach a curriculum, think about whatever subject you think you might want to teach. If you're going to teach that subject, you can't necessarily reward students every time they get a problem right or they get the right answer or they have done what you've asked them to do, because you can reinforce behavior, but you can't reinforce their actual learning. Okay, so that is, and some people believe wholeheartedly that behaviorism can definitely be used in teaching. There's a lot of research on it. As I'm working on my dissertation, I have read a lot about behaviorism, and I have come to the conclusion that I don't think it's a great way to teach. unless I'm trying to teach behaviors. The next theory is constructivism. And this one has more of a place, in my opinion, in the teaching of content. And so in constructivism, knowledge is constructed in the mind by each learner rather than being transmitted to the student by the teacher. So, in other words, the student is gaining knowledge. This could be from experience. This could be from, something the teacher has taught. It could be from an activity they did in class, but they're constructing knowledge within their minds. And they're constantly trying to reconstruct their mental knowledge as new information becomes available. So it's sort of this idea of, again, take that word construct, it's kind of the idea of building your knowledge base. So when I teach my beginning algebra classes, I try to teach that class as if my students don't know hardly anything. And obviously I hope they know more than I give them credit for, but I want to teach it in a way that we start very base level, and then we build, and we build, and we build, and we build. And we're constructing their knowledge base. And so hopefully we're able to build that knowledge base to where they go into college algebra and they're successful. And so that is the idea behind constructivism. And so you can see the third point here, curriculum should involve students in real situations that let them use and reconstruct prior knowledge as new information is presented. So continuing to use what they have been taught and then taking that and building on it. So again, in a math class, this works really well because we often take a topic, a very base level topic, and then we use that over and over again. And we just build and build and build and build. And so when we do that building, we are constructing their knowledge base using this theory of constructivism. So, when you go about developing, your own philosophy, I will tell you that experience is going to change your philosophy some. As you are in the classroom year after year, your theory, your philosophy on education is going to somewhat differ. And so as you're developing your own philosophy, and you have a rubric in your in Canvas that tells you exactly what all needs to go into your philosophy of education, because you're going to write one for this class. And so when you do, you want it to be an ongoing process. Again, as you get experience, your philosophy on what works and what doesn't work and what works well for you individually as a teacher, all of those things are going to change. Okay? And it's going to be, you may lean one direction and then you may have experience and it kind of pushes you in a different direction. You may start out very student centered and you may kind of shift towards more content centered. Again, it's often good to have a mix of all of those. When you develop your own philosophy, it does require you to reflect. Think about what happened in your classroom. Think about what went well. Think about what could have changed. What could you have done differently? How could things have been better? All of those things are going to help you build your philosophy. And again, it's ever changing, right? So as you gain experience, you're gonna see your philosophy kind of change. When I first started teaching, my philosophy was a very progressive philosophy. Students needed to discover things for their own, and they needed to take problem sets, and they needed to just explore, and I just was going to kind of be there to guide. And when I started teaching, I realized that just by itself was unrealistic. And I had a teacher tell me one time that activities and all these things are great, but eventually a kid's got to know 2 + 2 is 4. And I kind of took that to heart because it helped me to realize that my philosophy of being very progressive and trying a bunch of activities and having students heavily involved, that was good and that was fun for the student. But if they didn't ever learn anything from that, then it wasn't worth it. And so I had to kind of shift my philosophy from strictly progressive and work in some of the essentialism and work in, some of these other philosophies to understand that, okay, I can do activities and I can be progressive, but I need to make sure that I'm also teaching some basic concepts. And so, again, my philosophy has changed over time. Yours will too. And we're going to talk about eclecticism in just a minute. And that is not an excuse for sloppy thinking. Okay, again, as we define what that means, that'll make a little more sense to you. But, your thought shouldn't just be, I'm just going to try anything and everything. Just jump from one activity to another, or one idea to another, and just try stuff. Because then your classroom becomes a very unorganized place, and students don't really know what's going to happen when they come into the classroom, and it just makes that day of teaching very confusing for the student. And you don't want it to be confusing. And so, what is eclecticism? It embodies the idea that truth can be found anywhere, and therefore people should select from various doctrines, systems, and sources. In other words, your philosophy of education could come from a number of places. Maybe it comes from your experience as a student. Maybe it's built on what you learn in your education classes when you get to a 4-year university and a school of education. Maybe you have experiences there that build that. Maybe it's you have relatives that have been in the classroom and you have talked with them, and based on their experiences, you've kind of built in your mind what you feel like is a good philosophy of education. This eclecticism is just the idea of being able to have a lot of sources that help you determine what your philosophy is. The eclectic teacher selects what he or she believes to be the most attractive feature of several philosophies. And that's a good thing. That is a great thing to say, well, I believe this part of this philosophy is good, but I also think this part's good, so I bring that into my philosophy. Or I think this aspect is good, so I bring it in. And so it's good to have several philosophies and have kind of a mixed philosophy of education. And again, it's hard for you to do that as a student right now. And until you really begin teaching, it's going to be hard for you to pull in all the philosophies of education and develop that into your own. Okay, so as you write yours, again, in Canvas, look at the directions, because I'm going to tell you to think about this, and I'm going to name off several things that you're going to think about as you write your philosophy of education. Okay? And so hopefully those things will help you get an idea, at least for your first time, what your philosophy is. And this eclecticism at its heart is the recognition that no philosophy of education is able to dictate the ideal methodology or learning strategies for all situations or all students. So you may think, I've got the perfect idea, perfect philosophy of how my classroom should go. And even though it may be what you believe is the perfect philosophy, it's not going to work for everybody. I teach 150 students in a semester, and my philosophy of education, even though I don't get to implement it quite like I would like to, it does not fit everybody's methodology. I mean, everybody's learning styles, everybody's needs necessarily. And so, as somebody who kind of leans more towards the progressive side, I try to teach in multiple ways. I may have you in groups one day, or I may have you in rows one day and do a lecture, or I may give you some examples where it makes a connection for you from a real world standpoint. Those are all things that I can do as a teacher to hopefully help you understand my content. And so I try to be eclectic in that, from that standpoint of bringing in different philosophies and